Hey guys, in this couple of lessons, we're going to look at congruent triangles and how can we tell if two triangles are congruent or not. There are some certain situations that if some corresponding angles and sides of one triangle are congruent to the sides and angles of another triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. And so that's what we're going to go through and prove. So these are postulate names, and we're going to look at two of them today. We have the side postulate. Congruence postulate is what we call that. So if all three sides of the triangle are congruent to all three sides of another triangle, then those two triangles are congruent. That seems kind of silly, but when we talk about like the angles are going to be congruent and the sides are going to be congruent. So the triangles are basically identical, not even like proportional. That's not even what we're going to. They are exactly identical. Same thing. So now then our second one is going to be side angle side. So if any two sides and the included angle. So that's going to be really something that you want to pay close attention to. It has to be the angle between the two congruent sides. So, and the included angle of a triangle are congruent to two sides and the included angle of another triangle, then those two triangles are congruent. So, if you can look at the diagram, you can see here, if you look at the side diagram, we have triangle. Let's say JKL is congruent. So the little equal sign with the little squiggle on top, that's congruent to triangle. So if I do JK, I have to do, and I do JKL. So it has to be XYZ. So that is a very important that you write that in that specific order, because if not, then they would not be congruent, or of course, because those sides are not, the corresponding sides would not be congruent to the other corresponding sides. Okay, and then if you'll look at side angle side, so we would have two sides. So we have PQ and is congruent to ED, and then you have PR is congruent to FD, and then one's kind of big major thing is that the angle in between those two that are made up with the blue and the red, those two are the congruent angles. So angle P and angle D are congruent. So therefore, we would say triangle PQR is congruent to triangle. Let's see, let's make sure we write this right. DEF. DEF. PQR. Yeah. So it's just really important that you make sure that you have those orders in those letters in the correct order when you start naming them. So remember, it has to be the side that, or the angle that's between the two sides. If this is not the case, but if it were this side right here, so if it were the red and blue side and not the green angle, but just the angle E and angle Q, that would be angle side, which is not going to be the same thing as side angle side. So it has to be between the two congruent sides. So that's really important that you pay close attention to that. So let's look at examples here. So given the triangles below, determine if they're congruent and then go ahead and explain how you know. So remember that I have two right now. I only know of two congruence postulates. I either have side. So that means all three sides are congruent, or I have side, angle side. So what we have here is basically I just have two sides that are listed here. I have this side, I have JA is congruent to AZ. And then I have a DA and AM are congruent. So those two sides are congruent. I need the angle that's between there to be congruent in order for them to be congruent. So I need this angle right here to be congruent to that angle. Well, guess what? It is. It's not labeled on here, but remember back in Unit 3, we talked about vertical angles. Well, we looked at vertical angles with just in a parallel lines, like the parallel lines cut by the transversal. And remember that vertical angles were just in one little quad. Well, same thing here. So this is like just a line that's cut by another line. Vertical angles are diagonal from each other. So these two angles, so angle, I would say angle JAD, so angle JAD is, I'm going to go ahead and say this, I'm use the congruent, is congruent to ZAM, that angle, okay, because they are vertical angles. So I would have triangle JAD is going to be congruent to triangle ZAM by using side angle side congruence postulate. Okay, because it's the two sides are congruent, and then the angle that is included in between those two are going to be is what determines side angle side. So if that wasn't a vertical angle and those two triangles are separate over here, and we just had two sides were congruent to the other, and we didn't know anything else, we could not say side angle side. The only reason why we can is because we have vertical angles, and vertical angles are congruent angles. Okay, so given the triangles below, determine if they are congruent and then explain how you know. Now, this is kind of tricky here because you don't really see this. So hopefully you see this triangle here, QPC, and that's a triangle right there. So that's that red triangle. And then I have this green triangle, QMC, and it's right here. So you can see that they share QC side. Well, QC is going to be congruent to QC. It's a shared side, okay? It's like the reflexive property or something like that. So what I need to determine is the angle between the two congruent sides, because I have a congruent side. So here I'm going to erase those two, so now you can see those two. So now I have a congruent side here with MC and PQ, and then I have this congruent side right here. So in order to use side angle side and for the two triangles to be congruent, then I would need this angle here and this angle here to be congruent. So since they're not, it's not labeled there, and we don't know, if we knew that maybe that PQ and MC were parallel lines, it's cut by a transversal, and those are alternate interior angles, yes, they would be congruent. But we don't know that. There's nothing to tell us that anywhere on here. If it were two parallel lines, then they would be noted by this right here. It would have a little triangle here and a little triangle here, if that were the case. It's not the case. So we don't know for sure that they're parallel. Angle MCQ is not going to be congruent to CQP. So it's not congruent. So they are not congruent. And why is that? It's because the noted congruent angle, which is at P and M, is not between the two congruent sides. Okay, now let's look at the last example here. We have triangle PON is congruent to SOT. What other information will we need to verify this statement? So we know that they are congruent. So in order to verify this, we need something else. So and maybe to something else, I don't know. We just know that PO and OS are congruent. So I need one of two things. I either need side, side, side. So I either need all the sides to be congruent, or I need side, angle, side to do this. Now, remember back in example 1, we have vertical angles here. So you want to look for that. So angle PON, this angle here is going to be congruent to SOT because of a vertical angle. So we know that. So now we only need one more piece of information, and that is that these two sides are congruent. I need NO to be congruent to OT. So what other information there's that I could word this two different ways. I can either say I need NO to be congruent to OT to use the side angle side, or I could say that O is the midpoint of NT. Okay, if O is the midpoint, that would automatically make those two sides, those two pieces congruent. So if it's a midpoint, then we would know to be able to use side angle side. So we're kind of coming back and kind of starting to grab some of those things that we've learned earlier on with the vertical angle and now midpoint, knowing that it cuts it into two equal pieces. Those types of things that are now going to come into play here that you're going to be able, that you need to know to verify or be able to determine if the two angles, if the two triangles are congruent or not. So these are the types of problems you're going to have on your skill check. You either have is it congruent and how do you know? Okay, so using the two congruence postulates that you've learned, and then also maybe what other information do you need to verify this. So those are the two types of questions that you have for your on your skill check. And so these again are the two so far. We have more. Next lesson will be more congruence postulates to continue to build on. That's it. Now it's your turn to practice with your skill check.